Good morning and welcome to Plugged In. My name is Becky Harwell. I'm your host today. Lisa is going to be our technology guru. She's going to run the chat. Lisa, you want to tell them a little bit about that?
Yeah, so for folks that haven't joined these meetings before, just remember that if you want to ask a question, just go ahead and ask your question in the chat box and I'll make sure that to ask it for you. And or comments or resources or any sort of expertise that you want to share, just throw it in that chat box.
Thank you. Good deal. So Holly, thanks for agreeing to meet with us today. And before we start talking about Lean, I want you to just ask you to tell us a little bit about your role at UAMS and what you do.
Okay. Well, I am the Director of Project Coordination at UAMS. I've been here, I lose track, but I think it's 30 years or close to it. Started years ago in telecommunications. I spent a few years in recruiting over in our HR group, and then spent the most of my time in telecom and technology services. And then in 2013, took the opportunity to expand our Lean Six Sigma group.
Good. All right. Well, thanks, Holly. And so speaking of Lean Six Sigma, can you tell us what is Lean?
So Lean and Six Sigma are actually methodologies used to promote continuous improvement. So each are used independently or together depending on what you're trying to fix.
Okay. Okay. And tell us, what is it that we're trying to fix with this? Tell us a little bit why we would use it. Why is it important
Sure.
that organization?
Yeah, sure. So first, a kind of a misnomer is people think Lean can fix everything, and it can't. It has its strengths and weaknesses. So I'm going to start with Lean, and then I'll transition to Six Sigma. But Lean is all about removing waste from the system. Think of any process you've got, and I know that this started in the manufacturing and Toyota and the Ford group, but it actually applies really to any process. And that's why the beauty of it and the why it's been around for so long is you can apply it to any process. So Lean is about removing waste, but it's also about looking at the flow of your process and looking for continuous flow. So any opportunities to stop and delays, we're removing that. So you're working on your lead time to get, if you're thinking in manufacturing, it's the product to the customer, but even our patients is how to make them move through the process as efficiently as possible. And then Six Sigma, yeah, Six Sigma is actually, it's really focused on removing variation in the process and eliminating defects. So I always tell people if you're not statistically gifted, then maybe Lean would be the first place to start, because Lean is really practical tools where Six Sigma really does get into some of the statistics.
Okay, good. It's a great definition, because I was going to ask you to explain the difference. I've heard them used together and then I've heard them used separately, so I wasn't sure about that.
Right.
So your recommendation.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead.
So yeah, so I always recommend, and I think most people do too, is that if you're looking at a process and you're needing to fix it, you do your leaning up first. So you would use your lean tools before you would actually go for your Six Sigma. And think of it this way: so you're getting rid of all your waste, you're reducing your lead times, and then you're trying to remove the variation so you can make it more predictable outcomes. And think of it from the perspective is, if we could ever go back and actually go sit in a restaurant and you know who your favorite restaurant is, one of the reasons that they're your favorite is you have predictable dinners, experiences, right? And so that's the same thing that you're using Six Sigma for, is you're trying to make it as most predictable outcome as possible.
I see. So you talked about reducing waste. What are some types of waste that are defined with lean?
Sure, we have actually 8 forms of waste in lean. So we'll do this. We call it worm pit if you're trying to remember them, and you have to say it with a southern accent because there's 2 I's in pit. The W is waiting. So think about you're waiting for either approvals, results for, like if you're in the medical field, you're waiting for results for some tests that were run. Um, Anytime, everybody knows what waiting is, but waiting for somebody else to do their part or even the inventory to be delivered so that you can do the next step. The O is for overproduction, and that is producing, say think you're producing a report that nobody reads, right? Us managers are really good about saying, I want this delivered on a certain date, and then it gets set aside or it may not be used. So think of that as overproduction. Another example is making too many copies of something or making copies at all. Prepping for something that isn't currently needed. So that's overproduction. Rework is the R, and that's think of any medical errors or errors we make in general that we have to go back and fix or missing information. The M is for motion, and this is the motion of the person doing the work. So this is as much as if I had to walk across campus to get something, or if I had to search for something, even on a computer screen, if I have to go 3 screens deep, or if I have to move my eyes even from top to bottom or all over the place. So it's any additional and unnecessary movement. And the P is for processing, and I always consider that more of over processing. So in that example is, say you've got the same information you have to load on 4 different forms or 4 different locations in some electronic record maybe. Ordering more tests that are needed, we do that often in the medical field. And then redundant approvals is another good example. So say, for example, we have to get 7 layers of signatures. What do each of those signatures really independently add value to? That first I is inventory, and that is overstocking things. We're real good about having our personal stashes of things. So when we work with groups, oftentimes it is dealing with their inventory. The second I is one you don't obviously think of sometimes, and that's intelligence and intellect. And so that is actually how you use your staff, and if you're using them to the top of their skill set. Think of a nurse transporting a patient down to be discharged. Probably not the best use of their skill set. Also, not getting people involved and using their creativity and their knowledge when you're trying to make decisions or improve things. And so lean is all about getting the frontline people involved in fixing a process because they know where all the workarounds are. And oftentimes we don't always get those people. And then the final waste that we always talk about is transportation. And this is actually the movement of the product or the patient and how often we do that, and if those actual steps are required or adding any value to the process or the outcomes. So those are our 8 forms of waste.
Wow. Wow. So Holly, that's really interesting. It all sounds good. So how do you work with teams to actually go through and do a lean process? To kind of describe that for us.
So there's 2 different ways that people come to us. They're either coming to us because somebody has suggested they work with us, or they're pulling us in. They already know that they've got some issues and they want to improve it. So it can come from kind of a top-down introduction of us, or it's somebody coming to my office and just saying, hey, we've got an issue and we need some help. And then first thing that I usually do is ask them to kind of give me a little bit of background. So make sure that actually Lean or Six Sigma will be the right tools to use, because not always, yeah, like I said, we can't fix everything. So, so we just make sure that the actual product they're trying to, or the issue that they've got actually would be a good fit for Lean.
See. So, so now, are there projects that you're working on now that are maybe related to what we're going through COVID-19, or projects that you can kind of give us examples of that kind of help us see how it applies to us?
Sure. So when the COVID-19 pandemic got blown up, or it got bad in Arkansas, I was actually in Phoenix. So I was kind of warned I may or may not be able to come back on campus right away. They agreed that I could. So they threw me in right away with the screening site staffing. So my understanding is we stood it up really, really fast. We were only working with just random volunteers. And so they got us involved in trying to put some logic around how we would sustain the staffing of those sites. And so that's just putting some process together. Another example was our ever-changing visitor exception process. So, we went from a visitor could be with a patient, then we went to only if they needed assistance, and then it really was almost no visitors, and just working through the process and the communication that goes with that. Um, Another project that we got pulled into was the N95 masks. So an N95 mask, I don't know how many of you know this, but it's not like a surgical mask where you just throw it on and you squeeze it and it kind of fits to your face. An N95 is actually meant to actually almost seal. And so there's different models. And so even though UAMS has plenty N95s in general, there are certain models that we were having problems getting. And so you're fit, you actually go through a testing process, and so you're fit to a mask. And we were running out of certain models, and so we were having to get to identify the staff that were first critical that needed to be refit to a different model, and work through that process and get those people through as quickly and efficiently as possible. And we also
I see.
helped them build their surge plan to get more ICU, and how to co-locate some of the COVID patients. So yeah, those are a few things that we've been doing.
Great. Lisa, do you have any questions in the chat at this time?
Yeah, so we have a really great question with regarding to like the lean process. And so could you describe how these processes might be applied to the educational enterprise?
Sure. So so a couple different examples of how we've worked with education in the past is we actually helped them put the centralized registration office together. So several years ago, each of the colleges had their own independent registration office. They were doing their processes independently. Nothing was standard and consistent. And so we were charged with, Dr. Gardner asked us to get involved and set up a standardized process that we would do all of our registration in a similar manner. So that's an example on the education piece.
Cool. Thanks for answering that. So Holly, what are some common misconceptions regarding lean as far as when you work with people? What are some things that you've run into that maybe people didn't know or had a different thought about the way it works?
Yeah, so the one I want to, like, misnomer I want to get out there, and so everybody is okay with this, is when we get pulled in, a lot of people think leaning means leaning up our staff, our numbers of staff. And so so they're nervous, right, that they're bringing us in. Really, how do I say this? So I'm not going to say that that never happens, but mostly we're actually trying to help people learn how to do more with less. And it's more with maybe less human effort, but not necessarily humans, right? So oftentimes you'll talk to people and they'll say, I'm so busy, I can't even get to X. Well, what we're trying to do is get rid of the stuff that doesn't add value in their process so they can be used to do the more meaningful things. And so that's one of the misnomers that we really want people to understand is what we're trying to do is hopefully take a little bit off your plate so you can do the things that actually add value. And Lean's all about, from the perspective of our customer, is, we all know we're busy, we're all doing nice things, good things, but sometimes the customer, if you asked if they're willing to pay for it, they'd say, no, I don't really need that. Really, what's most important to me is something else. And so that's, I think, the biggest one of the, so I'd already mentioned the fact that Lean can't fix everything. And then the other one really truly is, to me, is that it's not about leaning up the number of employees they have. It's actually trying to figure out, oftentimes it's, we want you to do more, and we've got to first get something off your plate so that you can do more or something different.
That makes sense. Yeah, that's very helpful.
So we have another question, and I'm kind of excited to hear this answer because, with any sort of change, there's always pushback. So, Holly, how do you overcome any, or do you have any tips on dealing with the, we've always done it this way, sort of pushback, especially from people like in leadership and decision-making positions?
So we all, isn't it so funny when people say, oh, change isn't bad until it happens to me. And so, that is normal. And I think that if you go into it and understand that if we would have already made the changes, if it would have been easy, right? So, and kind of what I try to teach in our Lean group even is, you might come up with the most effective new process, but if you didn't go about thinking through from day one how this would impact the people that are going to be impacted, and how you're going to get them on board with the change, and it's not going to be successful. So it's starting early with the communication. It's all about the change management piece of it, and figuring out the what. Make sure you're answering the why. A good example is, my understanding is today we're going to hear that probably we're going to go to a universal masking on campus. And so I was sitting in the meeting and I said, I hope that they answer the why, because walking down the hall with somebody that knew that this was possibly coming out soon. So preamble, you guys are probably going to see this today. Is, wait a second, we're almost to our peak in the pandemic in Arkansas. Why did we wait this long, to universal mask? So it's all about making sure that the message is correct when you're starting out, that your whole team is on the same page. So oftentimes that's another thing, is if you don't get your team, pull a group together, everybody thinks they're working on the same project, but they all leave and you don't have a same message that you're going to share. Oftentimes the message is different. So if I walked up to you and I talked to you, Lisa, and I said, hey, yeah, we're working on universal masking, and then the next person said, we're trying to make sure that we don't get COVID from another person, and I'm like, whoa, wait a second, the message has to be the same from at least the team that's working on it. And oftentimes you think that you've got that well. So again, communications is a huge piece of it. And maybe we don't know all the answers today when we start the project. So it's not a one and done communication, which I think people that are part of the team think that they know, that they've communicated enough times, enough information, but as all we know is that isn't the truth. And then learning to actually communicate more one-on-one or small group instead of just by email and blanket information is important. Did I answer that question?
Yes, thank you. So we can't hear you, you're muted. I think so. That's great, Holly.
I think we have a follow-up question to that. So with regards to, this is another question from Theodore. So do you see people reverting back to pre-lean processes, ironically creating rework and waste for you? And how do you sustain or ensure sustainability when it comes to new processes?
Yeah, so I think to me that is the hardest thing for people to understand, and even for us to get right. sometimes is you spend so much time and effort developing the new process, getting it as lean as possible. Um, but if you don't have a good sustainability model and in place, that people just revert back to what was their old way. I mean, that's human nature, is that was comfortable. I knew that, even though it's not maybe even as efficient. Maybe you understand how efficient the new process is, but our habits are still not formed to the new. So it really is making sure that there is a sustainable piece to your solution. And that's things like making sure that you don't just initiate it and walk away. Um, do you have the process owner in as part of your team from day one so that they actually understand everything? They're there, they're bought into it, because I've seen it where you've handed it off to somebody, like a team worked on it, and then they hand it off, and that person really doesn't know all the why and the reasoning behind it, so they can't answer all the questions. Um, if you're doing something and you're measuring it, which we always want you to have a measurement, it's how is that measurement out there in front of the people? Is it still out there? Where are we showing it? Do we have it published someplace? um, I think, and I, I sit in a lot of administrative meetings with executives, and they're on to the next hot topic. And just because they're on to the next hot topic doesn't mean that the one you're working on isn't important. They've put it in your hands, and I think they trust you guys to do that. But sometimes for us that work in project management, it feels like, wait a second, we're not even done with this one yet, don't go on to the next, so it's also making sure that you have an executive sponsor that will be your advocate for those kind of things. Is how do you keep it out in front of everybody? um, Hand washing was one of our project. The hand hygiene project was one that they pulled us in on. And I will say that Dr. Rosenbaum has done an excellent job in sustainability, because she will not let that number get out of everybody's sight. So she's every single month, the cheerleaders sharing in several different venues that we're still in the 99 percentile of our hand hygiene compliance, even though we've hit that and sustained that for probably 6 months. So hopefully that helps a little bit. It's not easy. That's
Yeah,
the hard, to me, that's one of the hardest parts.
kind of highlights the need for leadership and everyone to be involved and to kind of keep it in the forefront of our minds and make it important.
Yeah.
So, Holly, if a department was interested in implementing a lean framework, where would you recommend them to start?
So we have some tools as far as just project plans. So if somebody was going to take on something, I would say smaller in their own department, um, there is just a framework on how to run a project, just the steps. So lean's also about doing things in the right order and the logical. So you could do just a random tool that's a lean tool, but if you didn't do the right things in the right order, I don't think you're going to have as successful of a project. It's not going to say that you won't make some improvements, but we do have kind of, I would call it a toolkit that we can share out to y'all. I know it used to be on the old intranet, but I don't think it's easily viewable right now on the new internet. But I can get you a copy of that and you can share it out. It's just in an Excel document that anybody can use.
Thanks, Holly. That sounds like a good resource. You know, I, I hear that you and your team work on lean processes all the time. But I know when I first started UAMS, I was invited to attend the lean training. Do you guys offer that still?
Typically, we do offer it twice a year. I was asked, so there's been I don't know if anybody knows who Troy Schmidt is. And I don't I don't know, he's a vice chancellor of quality or something like that in ICE. But he's asked me to pause that training right now. He is a master black belt, and we just want to make sure that we're offering a similar product out to everybody. And so,
Mhm.
but typically, yeah, I think we will be doing it still going forward twice a year. We're just kind of looking at the format of the educational piece. And I think
Okay.
we were doing classes about 16 to 20 people in that. And I think that Troy and I, when we talked, I think that would probably be what we do moving forward again.
Great. Well, Holly, when that's ready and you're ready to open that up again, if you can let us know, we can share that with our participants as well.
Sure. I do have a little bit of a wait list. If somebody's super eager, I can put you on my wait list, and I do some communications off that wait list as we have more information.
That sounds good. So are there any other questions for Holly or comments?
I have one back to the group, and they don't have to do it now, but anybody that saw something that they liked because of the COVID changes, what has gone well? You know, um, if there's things that we changed during COVID that you think, wow, if we could just sustain that, because I've heard that a lot. I would love to get feedback because I am advocating for us not to go back to what the normal was before COVID, that we're using any
Right.
of the changes and improvements to move us forward.
Yes, that's
Well, I'm
great.
seeing a comment, less meetings and yeah, and more frequent positive team meetings. And I think if I could wrap those two together, that would be my own input, and that would be being much more conscious about our meetings, where like they are important, that sort of thing. And not to mention location flexibility. I think we've learned a lot about that as far as being able to telecommute to work, and so
Yes.
definitely.
I think, yeah, I think we've also learned, that every time we thought a meeting was necessary, it really wasn't. We could pull things together and communicate in different ways. So yeah, that's a great takeaway. Less meetings. Yeah. And then when we do have meetings, they're more meaningful.
Right. And so I'm a big advocate for having agendas and having action items from those agendas. And if you're not going to come out with action items, then it really was just information sharing, and you need to keep that to a minute, those repeats to a minimum.
Right. Can send that message in a different way, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Holly,
I,
do you have anything else to leave us with?
No, if you can be advocates for um, our our tools and assistance, that would be great. I know that, we all know that there's things that can be improved. It's just getting that as a priority out there, and then people having the time to actually do their own projects within their areas too. So if anybody has a specific project, they can go ahead and shoot me an email. If they're working on something in their own area but just needs some mentoring or guidance, I'm glad to offer that too.
Lisa, were you saying something? I accidentally cut you off.
oh no, I mean, I'm watching the chat, and so I mean, I think everyone can see it, but these are great comments that are coming in as far as being mindful of work that can be done remotely. We talked about that, and changing that whole mindset of like, if I can't see you, you must not be working. Whereas we've proved that we can work without being watched, and that there's this overwhelming sense of like there's this more cooperation across campus and across business units during COVID-19, and to keep that up. And that's really what we've been striving for all along, really, as an organization. And then, of course, the less frequent reoccurring meetings just for the sake of meeting and so forth. And we do like to see each other's pets and kids in the background.
That's great. That is true. That is true. And you're right. Sometimes this creates more collaboration and helps break those silos down that, like Lisa mentioned, we're working towards. So that's a great thing. Um, Before we wrap up, Lisa, is there anything else in the chat that I see popping? I see numbers popping. No. Any other questions or comments that anyone has? Holly, I want to thank you for taking time for sharing this information with us today. It's great information. There are tools that are really good. Just my own experience in participating in an S5 was good for us. So thank you for doing that. And guys, I want to also remind you that later on tomorrow, I believe, we have 2 more sessions. One of them is going to be with Annabeth Collier, who's going to talk to us about kindness. And then the next one later on in the afternoon is going to be with an actual respiratory therapist who's going to share his experiences and his team's experiences as they work with COVID-19. So I think that'll be very interesting to learn from what's going on. I see chat blowing up. Is there anything else, Lisa, or is it just comments?
Yeah, just comments and accolades for how helpful this session was. So
good. Well, Holly, thanks again, and thanks to all of you who have joined us. And if you know people who want to listen to this, we're going to put it out on the HR website, COVID-19 resources. You can find all these recordings there. So if you want to share that with someone or ask someone to listen to it, feel free.
Thanks, you guys. It was nice
you.
chatting with you.
Have a great day, everyone.
Okay,
bye.